Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a palace where the walls seem to listen more carefully than the people do, where every footstep echoes just a little too long, and every whisper feels like it might be your last. You arrive not as a guest, not as a noble, but as someone small, someone easily overlooked, which is probably good, because honestly, you probably won't survive this. But hey, that's kind of the vibe here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know down in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I always love seeing how far these stories travel in the quiet hours. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't remember exactly when the whispers started. At first, they feel like nothing. Just fragments of conversation slipping through corridors as you pass by, a servant muttering under their breath, a guard who suddenly stops talking the moment you enter the room, the kind of silence that isn't empty, just carefully arranged. The palace itself is enormous. Marble floors stretch endlessly beneath your feet, polished so smooth they almost reflect your nervous expression back at you. Tall columns rise like frozen trees, holding up ceilings painted with scenes of glory, victories, feasts, celebrations of abundance. Everywhere you look, there are images of prosperity. And yet, strangely, no one here looks truly at ease. You notice it first in the way people move. No one lingers, no one laughs too loudly. Conversations stay short, clipped, and oddly cautious. Even the higher officials, those draped in fine silks and heavy gold ornaments, seem to carry an invisible weight on their shoulders. It's subtle, but it's there. You're new here, which means you're invisible enough to observe, and that's when you begin to hear it clearly. Not spoken directly, never that, but implied, hinted, avoided. The Emperor has unusual tastes. That's how they phrase it. Unusual tastes could mean anything, of course. Exotic spices, rare animals, strange delicacies imported from distant lands. After all, emperors throughout history have been known for extravagant appetites. It's practically part of the job description. You recall hearing once about rulers who demanded flamingo tongues, or entire peacocks served with their feathers reattached for display. One historical account even describes Roman elites using crushed pearls in their drinks, because apparently if you're wealthy enough, even your beverages need to sparkle. So at first, you don't think much of it. But then, the tone. It's not admiration. It's not even curiosity. It's fear. You're carrying a tray one evening, nothing particularly special, just a simple arrangement of bread and fruit, when you pass by two older servants tucked into a shadowed corner of the corridor. They don't notice you immediately. "Not again," one of them whispers. "It's not our place," the other replies quickly, voice tight. You saw what happened last time someone asked questions. You slow your steps just slightly. Not enough to draw attention, just enough to catch a few more words. But the numbers stop. That single word cuts through the air like a blade. By the time they notice you, both of them fall completely silent. You keep walking, of course. You have to. That's the first rule you learn here. Keep moving. Still, the words linger in your mind long after the corridor empties. The numbers. What numbers? At first, you try to dismiss it. Palaces are full of intrigue, after all. Political tension, rival factions, quiet schemes. None of this is unusual. In fact, historians still argue whether most royal courts were more dangerous than actual battlefields, just in quieter, more polite ways. But this feels different. Less like politics, more like something being hidden. Days pass and you begin to notice small inconsistencies. A servant who was working beside you yesterday simply isn't there today. No explanation, no farewell. When you ask, casually, you're met with shrugs or vague answers. They were reassigned, sent away, dismissed. Each explanation sounds rehearsed. Each one ends the conversation immediately. Then there's the kitchens. You're not assigned there, yet, but you pass by often enough to notice the activity. It's always busy, always loud, always filled with the scent of cooking food drifting through the halls. But sometimes the smell changes. It's hard to describe. Richer maybe, heavier. Not unpleasant exactly, but unfamiliar in a way that makes your stomach tighten rather than growl. You catch yourself pausing one afternoon just outside the large wooden doors that lead into the imperial kitchens. The heat seeps through the cracks, along with the sound of clattering pots and hurried footsteps, and then a sharp voice from inside. Careful with that. A pause, then quieter, almost urgent. He'll notice. You step away quickly, heart beating just a little faster than before. You don't know why that unsettles you so much, but it does. That evening the palace prepares for a banquet. These events are grand, almost theatrical. Long tables stretch across the great hall, covered in fine linens and adorned with golden plates. Candles flicker softly, casting warm light across polished surfaces. Musicians play gentle melodies in the background, their instruments blending into a soothing hum. It's beautiful, it's controlled, and it's very, very deliberate. You move quietly among the other servants, placing dishes, pouring drinks, adjusting arrangements. Everything has to be perfect. Every detail matters, because the Emperor will be here. You've never seen him up close before, only glimpses from a distance, an imposing figure surrounded by guards, moving with the slow, deliberate confidence of someone who knows the entire world bends to their will. Tonight, you might finally see him clearly, and as the doors open and the court begins to gather, you feel it again, that subtle tension threading through the room. The smiles are there, the laughter too, but underneath it all, something else lingers, something unspoken, something shared in glances and half-finished sentences. You adjust your grip on the tray in your hand, steadying yourself, because whatever unusual tastes means, you're starting to realize it's not just about food. The first time you hear about the famine, it's not presented as a tragedy. It's presented as a lesson. You're standing in a narrow side corridor, waiting for instructions that never seem to come on time, when an older attendant, one of those people who's been in the palace so long they almost blend into it, begins speaking in a low, measured tone. His Majesty remembers hunger, he says, not looking at anyone in particular. The words hang there, as if everyone is expected to already understand. You don't, not yet. So you listen. He was not always like this, the attendant continues, adjusting the folds of his robe with slow, practiced movements. There was a time when survival itself was uncertain. No one interrupts him. No one questions him. It's the kind of story that exists in fragments, shared carefully, passed along only when necessary. You lean slightly closer, just enough to catch every word without being obvious. The Emperor, you learn, was not born into the absolute comfort you see now. Not entirely. Yes, he was royal. His bloodline secured his place near the top, but his early years were shadowed by instability. Civil unrest, failed harvests, entire regions collapsing under the weight of drought and mismanagement. It's strange how often history repeats that pattern. Even in well-documented empires, famine wasn't rare. In fact, historians still argue whether climate shifts or political failure played a bigger role in the most devastating shortages. Either way, when food disappears, everything else follows. Order, trust, even basic humanity. And in those years, the palace was not immune. The attendant's voice lowers further. There were days, he says, when even the royal kitchens had nothing to offer. That catches your attention. You glance instinctively toward the direction of the kitchens, as if the memory itself might still linger in the air. It's hard to imagine now. The abundance you see daily feels endless. Overflowing platters, imported delicacies, wines that travel farther than most people ever will. But once, there was nothing. The Emperor as a child witnessed it firsthand. You picture it slowly as the story unfolds around you. Long corridors not filled with polished servants, but with anxious officials whispering about dwindling supplies. Storage rooms once stocked with grain now echoing hollow when opened. Guards growing thinner, their armour hanging slightly loose against their frames. And somewhere within all that, a young boy, watching, learning. Hunger, you realise, isn't just a physical sensation. It's a memory that carves itself into you. There's something else too. Something the attendant hesitates to say directly. They say, he continues after a pause just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable, that certain measures were taken. No one asks what that means. No one wants to. But your mind fills in the silence anyway. In desperate times, people do desperate things. That's not speculation. That's history. There are accounts, scattered across cultures and centuries, of extreme survival choices during prolonged famines. Entire communities pushed beyond their limits. Still, those are stories meant to stay buried, not echoed in palace corridors. You feel a chill run through you, despite the warmth of the building. They protected him, the attendant adds quickly, almost as if correcting himself. Ensured he would survive. Of course they did. An heir must live, no matter the cost. But something in the way he says it makes your stomach tighten. Protected? How? Fed? With what? The conversation ends as abruptly as it began. Footsteps approach, and the attendant straightens immediately, returning to silence as if nothing had been said at all. You do the same. That's the second rule you learn here. Forget what you hear, or at least pretend to. But the story lingers. Over the next few days you begin to notice how often hunger appears in the palace's imagery. It's subtle, almost ironic. Murals depicting overflowing harvests, sculptures of gods offering endless food, decorative motifs of grain, fruit, abundance in every form. It's as if the entire place is trying to convince itself that scarcity could never happen again. And yet, the Emperor's habits suggest otherwise. You hear small details scattered like crumbs. He dislikes waste, intensely. Not in the way a careful ruler might encourage efficiency, but in a way that borders on obsession. Plates must be cleared completely. Leftovers are not tolerated. There's a story, whispered, never confirmed, about a noble who once pushed aside a dish during a banquet. The next day he was gone. Reassigned, of course. Always reassigned. Historians still argue whether such strict control over food in royal courts was symbolic or practical. Some believe it reinforced authority, demonstrating that even something as basic as eating was governed by the ruler's will. Others think it was simply a reflection of personal trauma magnified by power. In this case, you're starting to suspect it's both. One evening, as you pass through a quieter wing of the palace, you notice something unusual. A set of doors you've never seen open. They're large, reinforced with metal bands and guarded more heavily than most areas. 2 soldiers stand on either side, their expressions completely unreadable. You slow your pace, just slightly. Not enough to draw attention, just enough to observe. The doors don't look like they lead to anything grand. No decorative carvings, no golden embellishments. Just solid, functional, and firmly closed. And yet, the guards treat them with a level of seriousness usually reserved for the Emperor himself. As you pass, you catch a faint sound. Not loud, not clear. But there. A dull thud, then silence. You don't stop. You don't look back. That would be a mistake. But your mind clings to it anyway. Later that night, as you lie on a thin sleeping mat in the servants' quarters, you find yourself staring at the ceiling, unable to fully relax. The palace is quieter here, but not silent. There's always a distant hum. Footsteps, shifting walls, the occasional echo of movement far away. It's almost comforting. Almost. You think about the famine, about the young boy who would become emperor, watching the world around him unravel piece by piece. You think about the lessons he must have learned. That food is power, that survival is not guaranteed, that control is the only way to ensure you never feel that kind of hunger again. And then, you think about the whispers, the disappearances, the kitchens, the guarded doors. A strange thought slips into your mind, uninvited and unwelcome. What if the Emperor never stopped being hungry? Not in the way you or anyone else understands, but in a deeper, more consuming sense. You close your eyes, trying to push the idea away, because if that's true, then whatever unusual tastes means, it didn't start here in the palace. It started a long time ago, in a place where hunger wasn't just a memory, it was everything. Power, you quickly learn, doesn't arrive with a dramatic announcement. It settles in quietly, like dust. At first, you only hear fragments about how the Emperor came to rule. No one gives you a full story, not in one piece anyway. Instead, it comes in layers. A sentence here, a whispered correction there, a detail slipped into conversation and then immediately buried under silence. But if you listen carefully, and by now you've become very good at that, you can start to piece it together. The Empire before his rule was unstable. That's the polite way of saying it. There were factions within the court, each with their own loyalties, their own ambitions, advisors who smiled in public and schemed in private, Generals who controlled more soldiers than the throne itself could comfortably command. Even members of the royal family who saw opportunity where others saw chaos. It wasn't open war, not at first. It was quieter than that, more controlled, more dangerous. Historians still argue whether such periods of instability were inevitable in large empires, or the result of particularly weak leadership. But in either case, one thing always seems to happen eventually. Someone takes control, decisively, and in this case, that someone was him. You hear about his rise in pieces, a rival removed here, a political marriage arranged there, an alliance secured, then quietly dissolved once it was no longer useful. Nothing dramatic on its own, but together, a pattern. You're polishing a long wooden table one afternoon when two officials enter the room, their voices low but urgent. "It was efficient," one of them says. "Efficient?" the other repeats, a hint of unease in his tone. He ended the conflict before it could spread. You can't deny that. There's a pause, then softer. At what cost? You keep your head down, your movements slow and steady, as if you're not listening at all. That's the third rule you've learned. Be present, but never noticeable. The Emperor, it seems, didn't just inherit power, he secured it. And once he had it, he didn't let go. There's a particular story that circulates more than others, half fact, half warning. It's said that early in his reign, a group of nobles conspired against him. Not openly, of course, nothing so reckless. They met in private, exchanged letters, made careful plans. They were discovered anyway. How? No one is entirely sure. Some say a servant overheard them. Others believe one of their own betrayed them. There's even a more unusual theory, that the Emperor anticipated the move before it even happened, reading the shifts in behaviour like a game already played. Historians still argue whether this was intelligence or paranoia, but the outcome is agreed upon. The conspirators disappeared, all of them, no trials, no public executions, just gone. Officially, they were reassigned, sent to distant provinces, given new responsibilities far from the capital. Unofficially, no one ever heard from them again. You notice something interesting when people tell this story. They don't focus on the disappearance itself. They focus on what happened afterward. Silence. Not the natural kind that fills a room when a conversation ends, but a deliberate, enforced quiet, the kind that spreads through an entire palace, settling into every corridor, every chamber, every guarded glance. Because after that, no one questioned him again. You see the results of that silence everywhere. Orders are followed immediately, instructions are carried out without hesitation. Even the smallest suggestion from the Emperor is treated as absolute law. It's not just obedience, it's fear. But it's controlled fear. Refined. Almost elegant. And then there's the food. You start to notice how closely it's tied to his authority. Every banquet is carefully orchestrated, every dish prepared with precision. Nothing is left to chance. There's a hierarchy even in the way meals are served. The Emperor first, always, then his closest advisors, then the rest of the court. It's a structure that reinforces itself with every bite. You recall reading once about Imperial China, where the Emperor's meals were so strictly regulated that entire teams were dedicated to ensuring their safety and quality. Food wasn't just sustenance, it was a symbol of power, control, and divine right. This feels similar, but sharper, more intense. Because here, it's not just about what is served, it's about what isn't. There are certain areas of the palace you still haven't been allowed near, certain doors that remain closed, certain questions that remain unanswered. And the more power the Emperor consolidates, the more those boundaries seem to tighten. One evening, you're assigned to assist during a smaller, more private gathering. Not the grand banquet hall this time, a more intimate setting, fewer guests, higher stakes. The Emperor is already seated when you enter, and for the first time you see him clearly. He's not what you expected. Not entirely. There's no wildness in his expression, no visible cruelty. In fact, he appears calm, composed. His movements are slow, deliberate, every gesture measured, as if nothing is ever done without intention. His eyes, though, they linger, not in a distracted way, but in a focused, almost analytical manner, as if he's constantly assessing everything around him, including you. You lower your gaze immediately. That's the fourth rule. never hold his attention longer than necessary. The meal begins. Dishes are brought out one by one, each more elaborate than the last. The aroma fills the room, rich and layered, almost overwhelming in its complexity. You move carefully, placing items, refilling cups, adjusting positions. Everything feels normal, until it doesn't. There's a moment, brief, almost imperceptible, when the Emperor pauses. His hand hovers over a dish, not reaching, not withdrawing, just considering. The room seems to hold its breath. Then slowly he selects a piece and tastes it. A subtle nod follows, and only then does everyone else begin to eat. You exhale quietly, not realizing you were holding your breath. It's such a small thing, such a controlled, simple gesture, and yet it carries weight. Because in that moment you understand something important. Power, for him, isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It's quiet, precise, absolute. And whatever those whispers are, whatever secrets hide behind closed doors and guarded kitchens, they exist within that same control, which means if something truly is wrong here, it's not happening by accident. The banquets, at first glance, are almost hypnotic. You find yourself drawn into their rhythm before you even realize it's happening. The glow of candlelight, the soft hum of music, the careful choreography of servants moving in perfect synchronization, it all creates a kind of illusion, an illusion of safety, of abundance, of control so complete that nothing could possibly go wrong. You carry trays through the Great Hall again, but now your eyes linger longer than they used to. You notice details you once ignored, the way certain dishes are placed closer to the Emperor, the way others never quite reach the far end of the table. It's subtle, everything here is subtle, but it's there. Each banquet is more than a meal, it's a performance. And like any performance, there are things the audience isn't meant to see. The dishes themselves are extraordinary. You've never seen anything like them before arriving here. Meats glazed to perfection, fruits arranged in intricate patterns, sauces with colours so deep they almost seem unreal. Some meals are inspired by distant lands, incorporating spices and techniques that travelled across trade routes you can barely imagine. There's a historical truth hidden in that too. Powerful empires often showcase their reach through food. The more distant the ingredient, the greater the statement. It wasn't just about taste, it was about dominance over geography itself, and here that message is unmistakable. Everything the empire can touch ends up on these tables. Still, there's something else, something beneath the surface. You notice that certain dishes arrive covered. Not unusual, at least not in itself. Covered trays are common in royal settings, used to preserve heat, to build anticipation, to add a layer of ceremony. But these are handled differently, always by the same small group of kitchen attendants, always placed directly before the Emperor, and always revealed slowly. You try not to stare, but curiosity has a way of pulling your attention exactly where it shouldn't go. One evening, as you stand just far enough away to remain unnoticed, you catch a glimpse. Only a glimpse. The lid lifts. Steam rises, and for a brief second, you see something that doesn't quite match the rest of the meal. It's not obvious, not shocking, just unfamiliar. A cut of meat that looks slightly different from the others. The texture, maybe. The colour. You blink and the lid is already back in place. The moment passes so quickly you almost convince yourself you imagined it. Almost. Across the table the Emperor begins to eat, and just like before, no one else moves until he does. That same quiet tension settles over the room. But now, you understand it a little better. It's not just respect, it's anticipation. Or maybe, hesitation. There's a strange detail you overhear later that night, as you help clean the hall. Two servants speak in hushed tones, their voices barely rising above the sound of clinking dishes. "He prefers it fresh," one of them mutters. "Don't say that," the other snaps quickly, glancing around. "I'm just repeating what I heard." Then stop hearing things. You keep your head down, your hands busy, your expression neutral. But your thoughts are anything but fresh. The word lingers. It shouldn't mean anything. And yet, it does. You start paying closer attention to the timing of the banquets, to when certain dishes are prepared, to how quickly they're served. There's a precision to it that goes beyond normal efficiency, as if something about those particular meals requires immediacy. Historians still argue whether certain ancient rulers developed highly specific eating rituals as a form of control or superstition. Some believed freshness preserved vitality. Others thought certain preparations held symbolic power. But here, it feels less like tradition, and more like necessity. Days pass and the pattern continues. Lavish feasts, carefully concealed dishes, servants who avoid eye contact whenever the subject drifts too close to something real. You begin to notice who gets invited to these banquets. Not everyone does. Only select members of the court, advisors, generals, favoured nobles, those who are useful, those who are loyal, those who understand the importance of silence. And then there are the absences. A seat that was occupied last week now sits empty. No explanation, no acknowledgement. Just a subtle shift in arrangement, as if the person who once sat there was never part of the picture to begin with. You feel it more strongly now, the connection between the disappearances and the banquets. It's not clear, not confirmed, but it's there, like a shadow you can't quite look at directly. One night, something changes. It's not dramatic, not at first. The banquet proceeds as usual, the same controlled elegance, the same measured movements, the same quiet tension humming beneath the surface. But as you move through the room, you notice a guest behaving differently. A nobleman, seated not too far from the emperor, shifts in his chair more than the others. His smile comes too quickly, too tightly. He speaks when spoken to, but there's a slight tremor in his voice. Nervous. You recognize it immediately, because you feel it too. At some point during the meal, he makes a mistake, a small one, almost insignificant. He hesitates. Just for a second too long. The emperor notices. Of course he does. Those eyes miss nothing. The room seems to still. The nobleman recovers quickly, forcing a laugh, reaching for his cup, continuing the conversation as if nothing happened. But it's too late. You see it in the emperor's expression. Not anger, not even irritation, just awareness. And somehow that's worse. The banquet continues. The music plays. The candles burn lower. Everything appears normal. But you can feel it now. That subtle shift, like the air before a storm. The next morning, the nobleman is gone. No announcement, no explanation. Just an empty seat, quietly removed from the arrangement, and no one says a word. That's when the illusion begins to crack for you. Because this isn't just about food. It isn't just about strange preferences or unusual tastes. It's about control so complete that even presence itself becomes conditional. You exist here only as long as you're allowed to, and the banquets, these beautiful, elaborate, carefully orchestrated banquets, are not just displays of power. They are reminders that everything within these walls, including you, can be consumed. At first, the disappearances feel coincidental. That's how your mind tries to process them anyway. People come and go in a palace. Assignments change, duties shift. Some are sent to distant provinces, others reassigned to roles you never see. It's easy, comforting even, to believe that nothing unusual is happening at all. But patterns have a way of revealing themselves, even when no one wants them to. You begin to keep track without meaning to. A servant from the East Wing? Gone. A kitchen assistant who used to pass you in the mornings? Gone. A guard who once stood near those heavy metal-bound doors? Gone. At first, you don't connect them. Then, you do. Because they don't all disappear randomly. They disappear after certain events, after certain nights, after certain banquets. You try not to think too much about that, but your mind keeps circling back anyway. There's a quiet tension in the palace now that wasn't there before. Or maybe it was always there, and you're only just beginning to notice it. People speak less, or rather, they speak more carefully. Words are chosen with precision, trimmed down to the bare minimum needed to communicate. Even casual conversations feel rehearsed, like everyone is constantly aware of invisible boundaries they must not cross. You find yourself doing the same. It's not something you decide consciously. It just happens. The fourth or fifth time you almost ask a question and then don't, you realise you've started adapting. That's how environments like this change you. Not suddenly, but gradually. quietly, until you're part of the silence. One afternoon, you're assigned to carry linens through a section of the palace you don't usually visit. It's quieter here, less ornate. The walls are still polished, still impressive, but there's less decoration, less effort spent on appearances, more function. You pass by a narrow hallway and notice a door slightly ajar. That alone is unusual. Most doors here are either fully open or firmly closed, nothing in between. You slow your pace, just a fraction. Enough to glance inside. At first you don't see much. A dimly lit room, stone walls, a table, nothing remarkable. Then, movement. A figure sits in the corner. You almost miss them. They're hunched, still, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. For a moment your brain struggles to make sense of it. This isn't a servant's quarters. It isn't a guest room. It's something else. The figure looks up, and your eyes meet. Just for a second. But it's enough. There's something in their expression you recognize immediately. Fear. Not the mild, controlled kind you see in the banquet hall. Something deeper, raw. Before you can react, before you can even process what you're seeing. The door slams shut. You flinch, stepping back instinctively. A guard stands there now, his expression hard, his posture rigid. You didn't see anything, he says. It's not a question. It's not even a warning. It's a statement. You nod quickly, lowering your gaze. Of course. He watches you for a moment longer, as if weighing whether that's enough. Then he turns away, and just like that, the moment is gone. You continue down the hallway, your steps steady, your breathing controlled. But inside, something has shifted. Because now, the disappearances aren't abstract anymore. They're not just names fading from memory. They're real, they're close, and they're happening behind doors you're not supposed to notice. That night, sleep doesn't come easily. You lie awake, staring into the darkness, replaying the moment over and over again. The room, the figure, the look in their eyes, and the guard's words. You didn't see anything, but you did. And now, you can't unsee it. There's a strange historical pattern that comes to mind. Something you once heard in passing. In many imperial courts, especially during times of political tension, it wasn't uncommon for individuals to be held in private confinement. Not publicly accused, not formally punished. Just removed. Historians still argue whether these practices were meant to maintain order quietly or simply to avoid scandal. But either way, they created a system where people could vanish without explanation, without record, without trace. And in this palace, you're starting to realize that system is alive and well. Over the next few days, you become more aware of your surroundings than ever before. Every corridor feels different. Every shadow holds potential meaning. You notice how certain areas are more heavily guarded than others, how certain paths are rarely used, how certain doors, like the one you saw, are never mentioned. You also notice something else. The kitchens have become busier. Not in a chaotic way, in a precise, deliberate way. More staff, more activity, more urgency, and always, that same group of attendants handling specific tasks, moving in and out of restricted areas with quiet efficiency. You watch them from a distance, careful not to draw attention. There's a rhythm to their movements, a pattern, and just like with the disappearances, it connects. One evening, as you pass near the kitchens, you hear raised voices inside, not loud, but sharper than usual. "You're sure?" someone asks. "Yes." And no one. A pause, then quieter. "Good. You don't stop walking, you don't look back. But your heart beats just a little faster, because you're starting to understand something. The disappearances, they're not accidents. They're not random. They're part of something structured, organized, controlled. And whatever that system is, it leads back to the same place. The kitchens. You remember the word from before, fresh. You swallow hard, pushing the thought away, because the alternative, the possibility your mind is trying to form, it's too much, too absurd, too impossible. And yet, the palace doesn't feel impossible anymore. It feels calculated, intentional, and very, very real. By the next banquet, you notice something you hadn't before. The guest list has changed again. New faces, carefully selected, carefully placed. And as you move through the hall, carrying trays, adjusting settings, playing your part in this endless performance, you can't help but wonder who will still be here tomorrow and who won't. You tell yourself not to look. That's the simplest way to survive here. Not to ask questions, not to linger near closed doors, not to let your curiosity stretch even a fraction too far beyond what's safe. And yet, here you are, closer to the kitchens than you've ever been. It isn't by choice, at least not entirely. Your duties have shifted, subtly, without explanation, and now you find yourself assigned to assist in areas that sit just on the edge of restriction. Close enough to see more, not close enough to understand it. The kitchens are overwhelming, not in the way you might expect. It's not chaos, it's precision. Every movement has purpose. Every station operates like part of a larger mechanism. Ingredients are measured, prepared, moved along with exact timing. There's no wasted motion, no unnecessary conversation. Even the noise feels controlled. The clatter of pots, the slicing of knives, the quiet exchange of instructions, it all blends into a steady rhythm. You try to match it, to move like you belong here, because standing out is not an option. At first, your tasks are simple: carrying water, cleaning surfaces, organising supplies, nothing that brings you too close to anything important. But even from the edges you start to notice things. There are sections of the kitchen that operate differently. Most areas are open, visible, shared among the staff, but others are separated, partitioned off by thick wooden dividers or heavy curtains. Access is limited. Only certain attendants are allowed inside, and they move with a kind of quiet authority that sets them apart from everyone else. You recognise them immediately. They're the same ones who handle the covered dishes at the banquets, the same ones who move between the kitchens and those guarded corridors without question. They don't speak much. And when they do, it's brief, precise, almost coded. One of them passes by you, carrying a tray covered with a cloth so thick it barely shifts as he walks. You instinctively step aside, lowering your gaze. He doesn't acknowledge you. But as he moves past, you catch it again. That smell. Richer than the rest of the kitchen. Heavier, not unpleasant, but not familiar either. It lingers in the air for just a moment before fading into the background of spices and smoke. You force yourself to keep working, to focus on your task, but your mind keeps returning to it. There's a detail you overhear later that afternoon. Two younger kitchen workers, clearly not part of the inner circle, whisper to each other while sorting ingredients. "They came in again last night," one says. "Who?" "You know who." A pause, then quieter. "How many?" "I don't know. I didn't look." "Good." The word is said with relief. Not curiosity, not concern, relief. You pretend not to hear them, but your hands slow just slightly as you process it. They came in. Not they arrived. Not they were brought. Just they came in. The phrasing matters, because it suggests movement, transfer, from one place to another. And you can't help but think of the room you saw, the figure in the corner, the guarded door. Your chest tightens. You focus harder on your work. That's the fifth rule now. Don't connect the dots, not out loud, not even in your own head, because once you do, you can't go back. As the day stretches on, you're given a new task, a small one, but closer than before. You're asked to deliver a stack of clean cloths to one of the restricted sections, not inside, just outside. You nod, of course. You always nod. The cloths are neatly folded, stacked carefully in your arms as you make your way across the kitchen. The closer you get, the quieter it becomes. The usual rhythm fades, replaced by something more contained, more focused. You stop at the edge of a heavy curtain. There's no guard here, just the barrier itself. You hesitate, only for a second. Then you clear your throat softly. "I've brought the cloths," a voice from inside responds. "Leave them." Simple, direct. You kneel, placing the stack neatly on the floor, and that should be it. That should be the end of it. But as you rise, the curtain shifts, just slightly. Not enough to open, just enough to reveal a narrow gap, and through that gap, you see something. Not clearly, not fully, just enough. A table, different from the others, heavier, more solid, and around it, figures, working, carefully, deliberately. You can't see what they're doing, not exactly, but you can see how they're moving, slow, precise, almost surgical. Your breath catches. You shouldn't be looking, you know that. But your eyes don't move, not yet. Then, a sound. A dull, heavy thud. Close. Closer than you expected. You step back immediately, your heart racing. The curtain falls back into place, the moment is gone, but it leaves something behind. A feeling, a certainty, that whatever is happening in there, it's not ordinary. It's not just cooking. You turn and walk away, your steps steady despite the tension building inside you. No one stops you. No one questions you. And somehow, that's worse. Because it means this is normal. This is expected. This is part of the system. There's a strange historical parallel that drifts into your thoughts as you return to your duties. In certain royal courts, especially during periods of extreme control, kitchens were among the most guarded spaces. Not just to protect the ruler from poison, but to control exactly what entered and left the royal body. Food, in those contexts, became a form of security, a boundary, a weapon, even. Historians still argue whether such control was born from fear or strategy. But here, it feels like both. By the time the evening approaches, the kitchen shifts into preparation mode for another banquet. The energy sharpens, movements become even more precise, and once again, those same attendants begin their quiet, controlled routine. Covered trays, restricted access, unspoken rules. You watch from your place at the edge of it all, careful, silent, invisible. But now, you're no longer guessing. You're no longer imagining. You don't know the full truth. Not yet. But you've seen enough to understand one thing clearly. The doors you weren't meant to open lead somewhere very real, and whatever lies beyond them is closer than you ever wanted it to be. Fear doesn't arrive all at once. It builds, slowly, quietly, like everything else in this palace. At first, it's just a feeling, something you can almost ignore if you stay busy enough, if you keep your head down and your thoughts carefully contained. But over time, it changes, it sharpens, it becomes something you carry with you, even in moments that should feel safe. You notice it most in the silence between people, not the absence of sound, but the absence of honesty. Conversations still happen, of course. Instructions are given, tasks are completed. The machinery of the palace continues to function as smoothly as ever. But something underneath it has shifted. The whispers are different now. They're no longer curious. They're cautious, measured, as if everyone has reached the same unspoken understanding and agreed not to say it out loud. You find yourself part of that agreement, even when you don't want to be. One evening, as you're carrying a tray through a quieter corridor, you overhear something that makes your steps falter, just slightly. It's not just punishment, someone says. Their voice is low, tense. It's something else. You slow your pace, keeping your movements natural. What do you mean? Another voice asks. A pause. Then, he chooses. The word hangs there, heavy, deliberate. You don't hear the rest. A door opens nearby and both voices fall silent instantly. You keep walking, of course you do, but the word stays with you. Chooses. Not random, not accidental, intentional. You've already begun to suspect that, but hearing it, hearing someone else acknowledge it even indirectly makes it feel more real, more immediate. The next few days only reinforce that feeling. The disappearances continue, not in large numbers, not in a way that would cause panic, just enough to be noticed, if you're paying attention. And now you are. There's a rhythm to it, a pattern you can almost map out. Certain individuals are present at specific banquets. Then, shortly after, they're gone. Not all of them. Not every time, but enough. Enough to matter. You begin to notice the looks people exchange during meals. Subtle, quick, but meaningful. Eyes flicking from one guest to another, as if silently asking the same question. Who will it be? It's a horrifying thought. And yet, it feels accurate. There's a strange detail you overhear in the kitchens one morning, something that lingers longer than it should. Not everyone is suitable, one of the inner attendants says, his voice barely above a whisper. Of course not, another replies. There are standards. Standards. The word feels out of place. Too clinical, too deliberate. You don't react. You don't even look in their direction. But your mind latches onto it immediately. because it suggests something very specific. This isn't random selection. It's evaluation. Criteria, choice. Historians still argue whether certain rulers in history developed ritualistic approaches to punishment, blending symbolism with control. Some believe it reinforced their authority in ways that went beyond simple fear. Others think it reflected deeper psychological patterns, trauma expressed through structured behaviour. And here, you're starting to see both. That afternoon, you pass by the same corridor where you once saw the partially open door. This time, it's fully closed, guarded. Of course it is. You don't slow down, you don't look, you've learned better. But as you pass, you hear something, a sound, faint, muffled. Not loud enough to identify clearly, but enough to recognise as human. Your chest tightens. You keep walking, that's all you can do. That night the banquet feels different. You can sense it the moment you enter the hall. The atmosphere is tighter, more controlled. Even the music seems quieter, as if the musicians themselves are holding back. The guests are carefully arranged, as always, but there's a tension in their posture now, a subtle stiffness, a hesitation that wasn't as noticeable before. You move through the room, performing your duties with practiced precision, pouring, placing, adjusting, watching, always watching. And then, you see him. Not the Emperor, not yet. A guest, seated near the centre of the table. He's new. You're sure of it. You've never seen him before. He carries himself well, confident, composed. But there's something just slightly off. A hint of uncertainty beneath the surface. You recognise it immediately, because it's the same feeling you've been carrying. He doesn't belong here. Not fully, not yet. And that makes him noticeable. The Emperor enters. The room shifts instantly. Everyone rises, everyone bows, and then, just as quickly, everything settles back into place. The meal begins. The same sequence, the same precision, the same quiet control. But now, you're watching differently. You're not just observing the surface anymore. You're looking for patterns, for signals, for anything that might confirm what you're starting to believe. And then, it happens. Again, it's subtle, almost imperceptible. The Emperor's gaze lingers, just for a moment, on the new guest. No reaction, no expression, just attention. The guest doesn't notice, or if he does, he hides it well. The meal continues, course after course, dish after dish. Everything unfolds exactly as it should, until it doesn't. The guest hesitates. It's small, barely noticeable, but you see it. A pause before taking a bite, a slight shift in posture, a flicker of uncertainty, and just like before, it's enough. The Emperor notices. Of course he does. The moment passes quickly. The guest recovers. The conversation continues. The banquet carries on. But you feel it now. That same shift in the air. That same quiet certainty. And by morning, the guest is gone. No one mentions him. No one asks. No one even acknowledges the empty space where he once sat. It's as if he was never there. You stand in the hall later that day, adjusting linens, your movements automatic, your thoughts anything but. Because now, there's no doubt left. The whispers weren't exaggerations, the patterns aren't coincidences, and the fear, the quiet, controlled, ever-present fear, it's justified. Because whatever is happening here, it's deliberate, it's selective, and it's still happening, right in front of you. At some point the palace stops pretending. Not openly, of course. Nothing here is ever open. But the illusion, the careful balance between elegance and secrecy, begins to thin, like fabric worn too many times. You don't notice the exact moment it happens. There's no clear shift, no announcement, just a growing understanding. Punishment here is different. You first sense it during a morning assembly. These gatherings are usually predictable. Officials present reports, disputes are addressed, decisions are made with quiet efficiency. It's all very structured, very controlled, like everything else in this place. But today, something feels heavier. A man stands at the centre of the hall. You recognise him faintly. Not a high-ranking noble, but someone important enough to have a voice. Someone who, until recently, moved through the palace with a certain level of confidence. That confidence is gone now. He keeps his head bowed, his hands clenched tightly at his sides. The accusation isn't read aloud, not in full, just fragments. Misconduct. Disrespect. Failure to comply. Vague enough to avoid specifics, clear enough to justify what comes next. You've learned by now that clarity is not a priority here. Control is. The Emperor sits above it all, watching, silent, still. The man speaks briefly, something about loyalty, about misunderstanding, but his words feel irrelevant. Not because they're untrue, but because they don't matter. The decision has already been made. There's no dramatic sentence, no declaration of punishment, just a gesture, a small, almost casual motion of the Emperor's hand, and that's it. Guards step forward. The man is taken away. No struggle, no resistance, just acceptance. It's the kind of quiet compliance that only comes from understanding the system you're trapped in. You expect something more, some finality, some visible consequence, but nothing happens. The assembly continues, as if nothing out of the ordinary has occurred. You return to your duties, but your thoughts stay with that moment, because something about it feels incomplete, unfinished, like a story without an ending. And then, that evening there's a banquet. Of course there is. There's always a banquet. The hall is as beautiful as ever. Candles flicker, music drifts softly through the air, and the tables are filled with dishes that look almost too perfect to touch. Everything appears normal. Everything feels rehearsed. But you can't shake the memory of the man from earlier. The way he was taken, the way no one reacted, the way it all just moved on. You move through the room, carrying trays, pouring drinks, playing your part, and then you see something that makes your chest tighten. A seat has been added, not unusual in itself, but its placement is. Closer to the Emperor than most, more prominent, more intentional. You try not to focus on it, but your eyes keep returning. Course after course is served, the same rhythm, the same control, the same quiet tension humming beneath the surface, and then the covered dish arrives, handled as always by the same inner attendants, placed directly before the Emperor, revealed slowly. You don't look, not directly, but you see enough. You always do. Something about it feels different tonight, not in appearance, but in context, because now you're thinking about the man, the accusation, the gesture, the absence. You swallow hard, forcing your attention back to your task, but your mind keeps connecting the pieces. There's a detail you overhear later as you help clear the hall. Two attendants, both clearly part of the inner circle, speak in low, controlled tones. It was appropriate, one says. Yes, the other replies, a fitting use. Use. The word lands heavily, not punishment, not justice. Use. You keep your expression neutral, your movement steady, but inside, something shifts. Because that word changes everything. It reframes the system entirely. This isn't just about removing threats. It's about repurposing them, transforming them into something else, something that serves a purpose. The Emperor's purpose. There's a strange historical parallel that comes to mind, something you once heard in passing. In certain ancient cultures, punishment wasn't just about retribution. It was symbolic, ritualistic, sometimes even integrated into daily life in ways that blurred the line between necessity and meaning. Historians still argue whether such practices were driven by belief systems or by power structures designed to reinforce control, but here, it feels personal, intentional. You begin to notice how the language around punishment is always indirect. No one says what actually happens. They say, reassigned, removed, dealt with, or now, used. It's a vocabulary designed to obscure reality, to make something unthinkable feel manageable, understandable, acceptable. That night, as you lie awake once again, you let your thoughts wander further than you usually allow, just for a moment. Just enough to acknowledge what you've been avoiding. The disappearances, the guarded rooms, the restricted kitchen sections, the covered dishes, the word fresh, the word use, the Emperor's gaze, his control, his selection. It all points to the same place, the same possibility, one that feels too impossible to say out loud, and yet you can't ignore it anymore. Because if punishment here leads to the kitchens, if those who are taken are later used, then the banquets aren't just displays of power, they're something else entirely, something far darker. You turn onto your side, pulling the thin blanket closer around you, as if it might shield you from the thought. But it doesn't, because the realization is already there, fully formed, fully understood. The Emperor doesn't just rule over his subjects, he consumes their existence, transforms it, controls it, in a way that goes far beyond anything you've ever imagined. And the worst part, no one stops it, no one questions it. Because here, it's not just allowed, it's part of the system. Once the idea settles into your mind, it refuses to leave. Not fully. You try, of course. You tell yourself there must be another explanation, something less extreme, something that fits more comfortably within the boundaries of reason. But every time you retrace the patterns, you end up in the same place. And you're not the only one. You start to notice the way people talk now, not just in whispers, but in theories, carefully framed, cautiously shared, always incomplete. It's as if the entire palace has become a place where no one knows the full truth, but everyone holds a piece of it. You hear one theory while passing through a quiet courtyard. It's symbolic, a scholar-like official murmurs, hands folded behind his back. A display of ultimate authority. To consume is to dominate completely. His companion shakes his head slightly. Or it's madness, he replies. A mind shaped by hunger, unable to separate survival from control. Madness. The word feels dangerous, too direct, too close to accusation, and yet it lingers. Later that day, you overhear another version. This one from a pair of older attendants who speak with the quiet certainty of those who have seen more than they should. It's not madness, one says. It's ritual. Ritual? Yes. There are traditions, ancient ones, where consuming something is believed to transfer its strength, its essence. The other attendant doesn't respond immediately. When he does, his voice is softer. And you think that's what this is? A pause. I think it started as something like that. Started. The word stands out. Because it suggests change, evolution. Whatever this is now, it wasn't always this way. You carry that thought with you as you move through your duties, your mind quietly assembling the fragments. Symbolism, madness, ritual. Each explanation feels incomplete on its own, but together, they form something more complex, more unsettling. Historians still argue about similar practices throughout history, whether certain extreme rituals were driven by belief, desperation, or a calculated display of power. In some cases, the lines blurred so completely that it became impossible to separate one from the other, and here, you're standing in the middle of that blur. You begin to watch the Emperor more closely during the next banquet. Not directly, never directly, but enough to notice patterns, his movements, his attention, the way he interacts, or doesn't, with those around him. He doesn't indulge in excess the way you might expect. He eats slowly, deliberately, as if each bite serves a purpose beyond simple nourishment. There's no visible pleasure, no greed, just focus. That, somehow, is more unsettling, because it suggests intention, control, a reason. You recall something you once heard about rulers who used food as a form of communication, not just in what they served, but in how they consumed it. Every action was symbolic, every detail part of a larger message. If that's true here, then what is he saying? That question lingers as the meal continues, and then something unexpected happens. The Emperor speaks, not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet comment, directed at one of his advisors. You understand, he says, his voice calm, measured, that nothing should be wasted. The advisor nods immediately. Of course, Your Majesty. A simple exchange, almost meaningless, but you feel the weight of it, because you've heard those words before, in different forms, in different contexts. Nothing should be wasted. It's a principle, a rule, a justification. And suddenly, the theories start to align in a way that makes your chest tighten. What if it's not just about control, not just about ritual, not just about madness? What if it's all of them, bound together by something even simpler, a refusal to lose anything, to waste anything, to let anything go unused? It's a chilling thought, because it transforms the entire system into something logical. Twisted, yes, but consistent. And consistency makes it harder to dismiss. You overhear one final theory late that night as you pass by a dimly lit hallway. This one is quieter than the others, more hesitant. They say he believes it keeps him strong, a voice whispers. Strong. Yes. That by taking in what others lose, he gains what they cannot keep. There's a long pause. Then, that's not how it works. No, the first voice replies softly. But what if he thinks it is? You don't stay to hear more. You can't. Because that idea, that belief, it changes everything. It means this isn't just about the past, or trauma, or power. It's about the future, about maintaining something, preserving something, at any cost. You return to your quarters, your mind heavier than it's ever been. Because now, the Emperor is no longer just a distant figure of authority. He's something more complex, more human, and somehow more terrifying because of it. Not a monster acting without reason, but a ruler with a system, a logic, a belief, one that justifies everything you've seen, everything you've heard, everything you've begun to understand. You lie down, staring into the darkness, letting the silence settle around you, and for the first time, you stop questioning whether it's true. Instead, you find yourself asking something else entirely. Why no one has stopped him? And the answer comes quickly, quietly, inevitably. Because he's the Emperor. Because he controls everything. Because the system works for him. And because anyone who might challenge it doesn't stay long enough to try. By now, you understand something important. Nothing in this palace happens alone. Not the banquets, not the disappearances, and certainly not whatever lies between them. There are people behind it, not just the Emperor. Others who make it possible, others who keep it hidden, others who ensure it continues. The inner circle. You've seen them before, of course, at a distance, always near him, but never drawing attention to themselves. Advisors who speak rarely, but when they do, it matters. Officials whose presence seems permanent, as if they've always been here and always will be. And then, the attendants, the ones from the kitchens, the ones who move between restricted spaces without question. They're part of it too. They have to be. Because systems like this don't sustain themselves. They're maintained, protected, refined. You begin to notice how these individuals interact with each other. There's no open acknowledgement of what's happening, no shared language that would make it obvious. But there's an understanding, a silent agreement that binds them together. You see it in the way they exchange glances, in the way instructions are given and followed without clarification, in the way certain tasks are carried out with absolute precision and absolute discretion. There's trust there, but not the kind built on loyalty, the kind built on necessity, because they all know something, and that knowledge connects them, whether they want it to or not. You overhear a conversation one afternoon that confirms this more clearly than anything else so far. Two officials, both clearly part of the Emperor's inner circle, stand near a window overlooking the courtyard. It's becoming more difficult, one says quietly. In what way? The other asks. The staff, they're noticing patterns. A pause. That was inevitable. Yes, but awareness leads to questions. And questions, the second official replies calmly, can be managed. Managed. There's that word again. Soft. Controlled. Dangerous. You keep your distance, pretending to focus on your task, but your attention is fully on them. What about the new ones? The first official continues. They don't understand the structure. They don't need to, the other says. Understanding is not required. Compliance is. The conversation ends there. Just like that. As if nothing more needs to be said. And maybe it doesn't. Because the message is clear. Knowledge is controlled, awareness is limited, and anything that falls outside those boundaries is dealt with. You start to see how carefully this system is maintained, not through constant force, but through selective action, small adjustments, quiet removals, subtle reinforcements. It's efficient, disturbingly so. There's a historical pattern here too, one that surfaces in your thoughts as you move through your duties. In many powerful courts, inner circles often operated with a level of secrecy that even high-ranking officials didn't fully understand. They acted as both protectors and enforcers, ensuring the ruler's will was carried out without disruption. Historians still argue whether these groups were loyal servants or silent manipulators, shaping events from behind the scenes. But here, you're starting to suspect there's something else entirely. Not just enablers, participants. That realization settles heavily in your chest, because it means this isn't just one person's actions, it's a network, a structure, a system that relies on multiple hands to function. You notice how the inner attendants in the kitchen operate with a level of authority that no one questions. They don't ask permission, they don't explain their actions, they simply act, and everyone else steps aside. Even the higher-ranking kitchen staff defer to them, not out of respect, but out of understanding. They know better. You recall the moment when you were asked to leave the cloths outside the curtain, the voice from within, calm, direct, unquestionable. That wasn't just confidence. That was authority, granted, protected. You begin to wonder how they were chosen. What makes someone part of that inner circle? Loyalty, silence, willingness, or something else entirely? It's a question you can't answer, and probably shouldn't try to, because the more you think about it, the more dangerous it becomes. One evening, you witness something that brings all of this into sharper focus. You're in the kitchen, working near the edge of one of the restricted sections, when a young attendant, new like you once were, makes a mistake. It's small, almost insignificant. He places a tray in the wrong position, that's all, but the reaction is immediate. One of the inner attendants steps forward, his expression unreadable. "You've disrupted the sequence," he says quietly. The young attendant freezes. I'm sorry, I didn't." That's clear. The interruption is calm, controlled, but final. There's no anger, no raised voice, just decision. "Come with me." The young attendant hesitates, just for a second, and that's enough. The inner attendant's gaze sharpens slightly. Not threatening, not aggressive, just certain. The young attendant nods quickly. "Of course," he follows, without resistance, without question. You watch them disappear behind the curtain, and something inside you sinks, because you've seen this pattern before. Not in the kitchens, but in the hall, in the court, in every part of this palace. A mistake, a moment, a decision, and then absence. You don't see the young attendant again. Of course you don't. No one mentions him. No one asks. The system absorbs the disruption and moves on, as if nothing happened, as if nothing ever does. That night the banquet proceeds as usual. Beautiful, controlled, perfect. But now when you look at the inner circle, at the advisors, the attendants, the officials, you don't just see individuals. You see roles, functions, parts of a larger mechanism, each one necessary, each one replaceable, each one bound to the same unspoken rule. Protect the system, maintain the order, ensure the Emperor's will continues, no matter what it requires, and for the first time, you realize something that makes your chest feel tight. This isn't just about survival anymore. Not for them, not for the inner circle. They're not just avoiding danger, they're sustaining it, keeping it alive, because as long as the system works, as long as it benefits them, there's no reason to stop it, and anyone who might try won't remain long enough to succeed. At some point the fear stops feeling external. It's no longer just something around you, something you observe in others, something you sense in the air, something woven into the palace itself. It becomes internal. You carry it with you, in your thoughts, in your decisions, in the way you move, speak, even breathe. Because now you understand what this place truly runs on. Not hunger, not tradition, not even secrecy. Control. Pure, deliberate control. And once you see it that way, everything begins to make a different kind of sense. The Emperor doesn't act out of impulse. You've seen enough to know that. Every choice is measured. Every action has purpose. Even the most disturbing parts of the system, the disappearances, the use, the patterns you've pieced together, they're not chaotic. They're structured, intentional. You begin to notice how this control extends far beyond the kitchens or the banquets. It's in the way information moves, or doesn't. In the way people behave, even when they think no one is watching. In the way mistakes are handled swiftly, quietly, and without disruption. It's everywhere. And the more you see it, the more you realize something unsettling. This isn't about sustenance, it never was. It's about domination. not just over bodies, but over existence itself. There's a moment that brings this realization into sharp focus. You're standing in a side corridor, waiting to be called for your next task, when you overhear a conversation between two members of the inner circle. They're not whispering this time, not exactly. Their voices are low, controlled, but not hidden. "He doesn't need it," one of them says. The other nods slightly. "Of course not." "Then why continue?" A pause, then calmly. "Because it reminds them." You feel your chest tighten. Reminds them. The words echo in your mind long after the conversation ends, because suddenly everything clicks into place. The banquets, the patterns, the selections, the disappearances. It's not about feeding, it's about demonstrating, reinforcing, sending a message so clear, so absolute, that it doesn't need to be spoken aloud. You think back to the Emperor's behaviour during the meals, the way he eats, not with indulgence, not with hunger, but with focus, with intention. As if each action carries meaning beyond the act itself, because it does. It's a statement, a reminder, that nothing in this palace exists beyond his reach, not even the people within it. There's a historical pattern that surfaces in your thoughts, something you once heard about rulers who used extreme displays of power to maintain control, not just through force, but through symbolism. Actions so unsettling, so unforgettable, that they reshape how people think, how they behave, how they perceive authority itself. Historians still argue whether such methods were necessary or excessive, but here, there's no debate, because it works. You see it in the way people carry themselves, the way they avoid mistakes, the way they don't question anything even when the truth is right in front of them. The system doesn't need to explain itself, it just needs to be understood, and now, it is. You start to notice how your own behaviour has changed, how you think twice before speaking, how you move more carefully, more deliberately, how you've stopped asking questions, even in your own mind. That realisation unsettles you more than anything else, because it means the system is working on you too. You're becoming part of it, not by choice, but by necessity. One evening, during another banquet, you find yourself watching the Emperor again. Not out of curiosity this time, but out of understanding. You're no longer trying to figure out what he's doing. You already know. Now, you're trying to understand why. And as you observe him, the calm expression, the measured movements, the absolute control, you realise something else. He doesn't see this as cruelty, not in the way you do. To him, this is order, structure, a way of maintaining balance in a world that once showed him what chaos looks like. You think back to the stories of his childhood, the famine, the instability, the uncertainty, a time when he had no control, no power, no guarantee of survival, and now he has all of it, absolute control over everything within these walls, including life, including death, including use. It's a transformation that feels almost inevitable when you look at it that way. Disturbing, but logical. You overhear one final detail that night, something that lingers longer than anything else. He believes it strengthens the Empire, an advisor says quietly. In what way? Another asks. A pause. Then, because nothing is wasted. There it is again. That phrase, that principle, the foundation of everything. Nothing is wasted. Not food, not resources, not people. It's a philosophy, a justification, a system, and it explains everything. You stand there holding a tray, your expression calm, your movement steady. But inside, you feel something shift. Because now the Emperor is no longer just a figure of fear. He's something more complex, more calculated, more certain. And that certainty is what makes him truly dangerous. Because he doesn't doubt himself. He doesn't question what he's doing. He believes in it. Fully. Completely. And when someone believes that strongly in their own system, there's no room for opposition, no space for change, no possibility of stopping it from within. You lower your gaze, stepping back into your role, into your place within the palace. Because now, more than ever, you understand the truth. This isn't just a secret. It's a structure, a carefully maintained system of control, built on fear, reinforced through ritual and sustained by those who benefit from it. And you're inside it, right at the edge, close enough to see, close enough to understand, but not far enough to escape. There comes a point when knowing isn't enough, when simply observing, quietly understanding, and carefully surviving begins to feel insufficient. You don't plan to get closer. You don't decide consciously to take a risk. But something shifts. Maybe it's the accumulation of everything you've seen, the patterns, the disappearances, the quiet acceptance of something that should never feel normal. Or maybe it's something simpler. Curiosity, the kind that lingers just beneath fear, the kind that whispers, just one look. And that's how it happens. Not through recklessness, but through a moment. A small, almost insignificant opening. The palace is quieter than usual that night. Not silent, never silent, but subdued. The kind of quiet that settles in after a long day when most of the activity is slowed and only the necessary movements remain. You're finishing a late task, carrying a small bundle of cloths through a corridor that leads once again near the kitchens. You've been here before, you know the layout, you know where not to look. But tonight, something is different. The guards aren't in their usual positions, not all of them. There's a gap, a small one, but enough. You slow your steps, not stopping, never stopping, just adjusting. The door you've seen before, the reinforced one, the one that always remains closed, is slightly open. Not wide, not inviting, just enough. Your heart begins to beat faster. You tell yourself to keep walking, to ignore it, to follow the rules you've learned so carefully, but your feet hesitate just for a second. And in this place, a second is all it takes. You glance, quickly, carefully, and through that narrow opening you see more than you ever have before. The room is dimly lit, not dark, but shadowed. The kind of lighting that hides as much as it reveals. There are people inside, not many, a small group, moving with the same precision you've seen in the kitchens, the same controlled, deliberate motions. But this isn't a kitchen. Not exactly. The space feels different, more enclosed, more contained. At the centre, there's a table, the same kind you glimpsed before, heavy, solid, unmistakable. You don't see everything. Your angle is limited, your view obstructed, but you see enough. Shapes, movements, details that your mind struggles to process, and then, almost instinctively, begins to avoid. Because understanding them fully would mean accepting something you're not ready to accept. There's a sound, soft, controlled, not loud enough to echo, but close enough to feel. Your breath catches. You shouldn't be here. You know that. Every instinct you have is telling you to step away, to close the distance, to forget what you've seen. But your eyes linger, just a moment longer, and then someone moves, not toward you, but close enough that the angle shifts, and suddenly the gap feels wider, the view clearer, too clear. Your body reacts before your mind does. You step back, quickly, silently. Your heart is pounding now, loud enough that you're certain someone inside must hear it. You turn away, walk. Don't run, never run. Just walk, steady, controlled, as if nothing happened, as if you didn't just see what you saw, as if you didn't just come closer to the truth than anyone in your position ever should. The corridor stretches ahead of you, longer than it felt before. Each step feels heavier, each sound sharper. You expect to be stopped, to hear a voice behind you, to feel a hand on your shoulder, but nothing happens. You reach the end of the hallway, turn, continue, and just like that, you're back in the open, back in the normal flow of the palace. Servants moving, guards standing, life continuing as if nothing has changed. But for you, everything has, because now there's no doubt left, no uncertainty, no space for alternative explanations. You've seen enough, more than enough. That night you don't sleep, not even for a moment. You lie there staring into the darkness, your mind replaying the image over and over again. The room, the table, the movements, the sounds. You try to make sense of it, to fit it into something logical, something manageable, but it resists, because it's not meant to be understood, not fully, not comfortably. There's a historical pattern that surfaces again, one you've thought about before, moments when individuals come too close to truths they weren't meant to see, when knowledge itself becomes dangerous. Historians still argue whether those individuals were brave or simply unlucky, because in places like this, knowing too much is rarely an advantage. It's a risk, a liability, a threat. And now, You carry that threat with you, whether you want to or not. You think about the people who disappeared, the ones who hesitated, the ones who made mistakes, the ones who were simply noticed, and for the first time, you wonder if they saw something too, if they had a moment like this, a glimpse, a realization, a second where everything became clear, and then they were gone. The thought settles heavily in your chest because it means you've crossed a line, an invisible boundary that separates those who suspect from those who know. And in this palace, that line matters more than anything else. You close your eyes, trying to steady your breathing, trying to slow your thoughts. But one question keeps returning, persistent, unavoidable. Now that you've seen it, what happens to you? The strange thing about fear is that it doesn't always push you to act. Sometimes it freezes you in place. You wake the next morning feeling exactly the same as you did before. You follow your duties. You move through the corridors. You keep your head down, your voice steady, your presence as invisible as possible. From the outside, nothing has changed. But inside, everything is louder, sharper, more immediate. Every glance feels heavier. Every footstep behind you carries weight. Every pause in conversation feels like it might be about you, because now you know. And knowing in a place like this feels dangerously close to being seen. You spend the day avoiding the areas you once drifted near without thinking. The kitchens, the guarded corridors, the reinforced doors. You don't go near them, not even by accident. You stick to the safer routes, the open spaces, the places where people gather in numbers, where visibility feels like protection. It's not, but it helps you breathe. Barely. You begin to notice something else, not in others, in yourself. You've become quieter, not just in speech, in thought. Your mind actively avoids certain conclusions now, edges around them, redirects itself whenever it gets too close. It's a kind of self-preservation, a mental version of keeping your head down. Because if you think too clearly about what you saw, you might react, and reacting would be a mistake. Days pass like this, controlled, measured, uneventful on the surface, but underneath, something is building. Not openly, not visibly, but there. You start to notice small signs, tiny disruptions in the otherwise perfect system, a glance that lingers just a second too long, a conversation that cuts off too abruptly, a hesitation that wasn't there before. It's subtle, but it's spreading. Others know, not everything, not the full truth, but enough. Enough to feel it, enough to question it, quietly, carefully. You overhear something one evening that confirms this more clearly than anything else so far. Two servants, both older, both experienced, stand in a shadowed corner of the courtyard. It's happening more often, one says. The other nods slightly. I've noticed. And you don't think. No. The response is immediate, firm. They've always maintained control. A pause, then softer. But control requires balance. Balance. The word feels fragile, unstable, because balance can shift, it can break. You move past them without stopping, your expression neutral, your pace steady. But their words stay with you, because they suggest something you hadn't fully considered before. The system isn't perfect. It works, yes, but it requires maintenance, precision, constant adjustment, and if something changes, if something disrupts that balance, then the entire structure could falter. It's a dangerous thought, not because it offers hope, but because it introduces uncertainty. And uncertainty, in a place like this, is unpredictable. You begin to notice more of these small fractures, a guard who seems distracted, an attendant who makes a minor mistake and isn't immediately removed, an advisor who speaks a fraction too openly before correcting himself. None of it is dramatic. None of it would stand out on its own, but together they form a pattern, a subtle shift, like the first signs of something beginning to crack. There's a historical pattern here too, one that drifts into your thoughts as you move through your duties. Even the most controlled empires, the most absolute rulers, eventually face moments where the system they've built begins to strain under its own weight. Historians still argue whether those moments are inevitable, or the result of specific choices. But they all agree on one thing. When cracks appear, they rarely stay small. One night, as you lie awake once again, you let your thoughts wander just a little further than usual. Not toward the truth you saw, but toward the system itself, the structure, the control, the balance, and you realize something that makes your chest tighten. This place runs on fear, but fear isn't stable. It works until it doesn't, until it shifts into something else, something more unpredictable, like doubt, like resistance. You haven't seen open defiance, not yet, but you've seen the beginnings of something quieter, something more subtle, people noticing patterns, people connecting pieces, people thinking, carefully, silently, but thinking. And that, you realize, might be the most dangerous thing of all, because once people start to think, the system has to work harder to contain them, to control them, to maintain that delicate balance. You think back to the Emperor, his certainty, his control, his belief in the system he's created, and for the first time, you wonder if even he can hold it together forever. It's not a comforting thought. It doesn't feel like hope. It feels like standing at the edge of something unstable, something that could shift at any moment. And if it does, you won't be safe. No one will. Because when systems like this break, they don't fall quietly, they collapse. You close your eyes, pulling the thin blanket closer around you, trying to block out the thoughts. But one question lingers. Quiet. Persistent. Unanswered. If the balance breaks, what happens to everyone inside? The beginning of the end doesn't look dramatic. There's no sudden uprising, no loud declarations, no clear moment where everything changes. Instead, it starts the same way everything else does here. Quietly. You notice it first in the Emperor, not in anything obvious. He still attends the banquets, still moves with that same measured control, still commands the room without raising his voice, but something is off, subtle, almost imperceptible. His pauses are slightly longer, his gaze lingers a fraction too long on certain faces, and occasionally, very occasionally, there's something behind his expression that wasn't there before. Not doubt, not exactly, but something close to it. Strain. You only catch it because you've been watching so carefully. Because you've learned to read the smallest details. Because here, the smallest details matter. The inner circle notices it too. Of course they do. You see it in the way they adjust around him. Conversations become even more controlled, movements even more precise. It's as if they're compensating for something, maintaining the balance, holding the structure together. But the effort is visible now, and that visibility is dangerous. There's a shift in the palace that you can feel, even if no one acknowledges it directly. The tension is sharper, less contained. The quiet fear that once felt controlled now carries an edge of unpredictability. People still follow the rules, still keep their heads down. But there's something else mixed in now. Uncertainty. And uncertainty changes everything. You overhear a conversation between two advisors that confirms what you're sensing. It's becoming harder to manage, one says. In what way? The other asks. The consistency. A pause. He's changing the patterns. That makes your chest tighten. Patterns. The one thing that made this system understandable, predictable, controlled. If those patterns shift, then everything becomes unstable. The second advisor exhales slowly. That complicates things. Yes, the first replies. It does. The conversation ends there, but the implication lingers, because if even the inner circle is struggling to keep up, then something fundamental is shifting. You begin to notice the effects almost immediately. A banquet where the usual rhythm feels uneven, courses arriving slightly out of sequence, attendants exchanging brief, uncertain glances. Nothing obvious. Nothing that would draw attention from someone who isn't looking for it. But you are, and you see it. The Emperor notices too, of course he does. His gaze sharpens, his movements slow. For a moment the entire room seems to hold its breath, and then he continues, as if nothing happened. But the illusion is thinner now, more fragile. You feel it in your chest, like standing on a surface that looks solid but isn't quite stable. There's a historical pattern that comes to mind, one you've brushed against before. Rulers who maintained absolute control for years, sometimes decades, often began to shift in their final days. Not always visibly, not always dramatically, but internally. Their systems, once precise and reliable, became harder to sustain. Historians still argue whether this was due to age, pressure, paranoia, or simply the weight of maintaining control for too long. But the result is almost always the same. Cracks. You're seeing those cracks now, not in the structure itself, but in the way it's being held together. One evening, something happens that confirms it more clearly than anything else. You're in the kitchen, working near one of the restricted sections, when a disagreement breaks out. Not loud, not chaotic, but unmistakable. Two inner attendants stand facing each other, their voices low but tense. "This isn't how it's done," one says. "It's how it's being done now," the other replies. "That's not the same thing." A pause. Then, "We don't question it." The words are firm, final, but they don't carry the same certainty you've heard before. There's hesitation there, doubt, and that doubt spreads. The first attendant nods slowly, but the tension doesn't fully disappear. It lingers, like everything else. You step away before you're noticed, your heart beating a little faster, because this is new. The inner circle doesn't disagree, not openly, not even quietly. And yet, here it is. A fracture, small, but real. That night, you lie awake once again, your thoughts heavier than ever, because now, the system doesn't just feel dangerous, it feels unstable, and instability, in a place built entirely on control, is catastrophic. You think about the Emperor, his certainty, his belief, his need to maintain that absolute structure, and you wonder, what happens when even he can't hold it together anymore? The answer doesn't come immediately, but when it does, it's not comforting. Because systems like this don't simply fade away. They don't dissolve quietly into nothing. They collapse, and when they do, they take everything with them, everyone, including you. You close your eyes, trying to push the thought away, trying to hold on to the illusion of control, even as it begins to slip. But deep down, you know, the end has already started. It's just moving the same way everything else here does. Slowly, quietly, inevitably. The collapse doesn't come with a single moment. No dramatic fall, no sudden silence. It happens the way everything here has always happened. Gradually, quietly, until it's impossible to ignore. At first, it's just inconsistency. A banquet delayed without explanation. A guest list that changes too suddenly. Inner attendants moving with less certainty, their once perfect rhythm now slightly uneven. You notice it in the smallest ways. A hesitation, a misstep, a correction that comes just a fraction too late. The system is still functioning, but it's no longer seamless, and in a place built on precision, even the smallest flaw stands out. You move through your duties as you always have, keeping your head down, your movements controlled, your thoughts carefully contained. But now, there's something else beneath it all. Awareness, not just yours, everyone's. It's subtle, but it's there. People are watching more closely, listening more carefully, noticing things they once ignored. The silence in the palace has changed. It's no longer just cautious. It's tense, uncertain, like a held breath that no one knows when to release. You see it most clearly during one of the final banquets you attend. Everything is as it should be. The candles, the music, the arrangement of dishes, the Emperor seated at the centre, as always. And yet, it feels different. The rhythm is off, not visibly, not to anyone who isn't paying attention, but you are, and you can feel it. The Emperor moves more slowly now, not with the same deliberate control as before, but with something heavier, something that feels almost like effort. His gaze lingers longer, not with focus, but with something closer to searching, as if he's trying to find something that isn't there anymore. The inner circle adjusts around him, just as they always have. But now their movements feel reactive, not controlled, not planned. They're compensating, trying to maintain something that's slipping, and that difference is everything. There's a moment during the meal when everything almost stops. It's brief, barely noticeable, but you see it, a delay, a dish arriving just a second too late. The Emperor's hand pauses, his eyes lift. The room stills, and for the first time, there's uncertainty, not in the people around him, in him. It's small, fleeting, but real, and once you see it, You can't unsee it. The moment passes, the meal continues, the illusion holds, but it's thinner now, fragile, like glass under pressure. You hear whispers later that night, not the careful, controlled kind. Something looser, more open. It's changing, someone says. It has to, another replies. It can't continue like this forever. The words feel dangerous, but they're not silenced. Not immediately. That alone tells you everything you need to know. The system is weakening, and when systems like this weaken, they don't recover, they unravel. You begin to notice more absences, not the quiet, controlled disappearances from before, but something different. Members of the inner circle no longer appearing at their usual posts. Attendants missing from their assigned positions. Guards reassigned without clear purpose. It's not organised. It's not structured. It's chaotic. And chaos doesn't belong here, which means something has gone very wrong. There's a historical pattern that settles into your thoughts as you move through these final days. Even the most powerful rulers, the most absolute systems, eventually reach a point where control becomes impossible to maintain. Historians still argue about the exact causes, whether it's internal pressure, external forces, or simply the weight of sustaining such a system for too long, but the outcome is almost always the same. Collapse. Not always violent, not always immediate, but inevitable. You're witnessing that inevitability now. One evening, the Emperor doesn't appear. No announcement, no explanation. The banquet is prepared, the guests are seated, the system tries to continue, but without him, it feels hollow, incomplete. The inner circle moves quickly to adapt, adjusting, rearranging, maintaining the illusion, but it doesn't hold, because the system was never just about the structure. It was about him, his presence, his control, his belief. Without that, everything begins to fall apart. The following days blur together. Movement, confusion, silence, then noise, not loud, but more than before. Voices raised slightly higher, questions asked slightly more openly. It's not rebellion, not yet. But it's something close. The balance is broken, and once that happens, there's no going back. You don't see the Emperor again, not clearly, not directly. There are rumours, of course, illness, isolation, paranoia, each one different, each one incomplete. Historians still argue about what happened in those final days, whether he withdrew by choice, whether he was removed quietly by those closest to him, or whether his own system simply consumed itself from within. But here, in this moment, you don't need to know the exact answer, because the result is already clear. The palace is changing, the structure is dissolving, the control that once defined everything is slipping away, and in its place, something uncertain begins to grow. You find yourself standing in the same corridor where this all began. The same polished floors, the same towering columns, the same painted ceilings depicting endless abundance, and yet it feels different, quieter, not with fear, but with absence. The whispers are gone, because there's nothing left to hide, only what remains. You think back to everything you've seen, the banquets, the disappearances, the system, the control, the Emperor, and you realise something that settles deeply into your thoughts. For all its precision, for all its power, for all its control, it couldn't last, because systems built on fear, on domination, on the idea that nothing should ever be wasted, eventually consume themselves. And now, as you stand there, no longer just an observer but someone who has lived through it, you understand the truth, not just of what happened, but of what remains. Silence, space, and the memory of something that once felt unbreakable, but wasn't. The night softens around you now. The palace, once so heavy with tension, feels distant, like a memory fading at the edges. The corridors stretch out the same way they always have, but without that quiet pressure pressing against your thoughts. You move more slowly, breathe a little easier. The weight you've been carrying begins to loosen, just slightly. There are no more patterns to follow, no more whispers to decode, no more careful steps to measure against unseen rules. Just stillness. You let your mind drift, Not toward the details, not toward the things you saw, but toward the quiet that follows. The kind of quiet that settles in after everything has already happened, after the tension has passed, after the story has reached its natural end. And as you stand there, or maybe now lie comfortably wherever you are, you can let that stillness settle around you too. No need to hold on to anything, no need to figure anything out, just the slow, steady rhythm of your breath, the soft hum in the background, the feeling of the world gently easing. And as the palace fades completely into the distance, becoming just another story, just another quiet echo in time, you can let your thoughts soften, let your eyes grow heavy, and drift, gently, slowly, into rest.